All right. Okay. I probably should have drank like a cup of water or something before starting this because my throat actually feels kind of parched. But I'm already lying down on top of my bed. I'm lazy, so we are just gonna go with it. So, but if my throat like cracks, did I just say my throat cracks? If my voice cracks at any point in time, well, we know what happened. So, today, let us talk about difficult conversations. But first, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good whatever time of the day you are listening to this. You are welcome to another episode of Volatile Times with your darling, lovely, fat guy on the internet, Daniel. I think one of the strongest suits of the intro to this pod is that there is no intro. Okay, everything is just I have written like probably 20 different intro scripts and I've tried to use them over time on this podcast, but like it never sticks. It never sticks because this is my chance to ramble. This is my chance to ramble. But anyway, if this is your first time on the pod, listening to the pod, I mean, welcome. Hello, how are you doing? I hope you are gonna have a fun time listening to this. And if you are a returner, how you doing, baby? It's nice to see you. And before we go into the main conversation for the day, please do not forget to subscribe. Okay, that is really, really important. Do not forget to subscribe and also do not forget to share this episode on your stories, wherever it is you can share it because other people need to listen to this. So let's talk about difficult conversations. First off, when I say difficult conversations, I don't just mean conversations that are hard to have because of distance or something like that, or maybe some technical difficulties. No, this is not like a botched online interview kind of scenario. These are conversations that revolve around some sort of like perception of the world or morality or relationship dynamics, that are not so easy to address. They need to be confronted, and especially when you don't like confrontation, everything feels like an argument, everything feels like a fight. I just don't want that drama, right? Those are difficult conversations, and they manifest in so many different aspects of our social discourse. They manifest around moral issues, they manifest around issues like ethics, they manifest around relational issues. You understand? When is like relational issues such as when is it okay for you as a guy to ask her to, put a finger up there? Do you get like, is it 3 weeks? Is 3 months, enough of a dating period for you guys to know to be very familiar with each other and your buddies to, tell her that, our lack of finger, like like just press the button a little bit. You understand that kind of thing? Like different kind of things like that. I can't believe that's the example that came into my head. But anyway, different kind of things like that. And recently, a couple of weeks ago on Discord, on a particular Discord channel, I had a conversation about pedophilia. I'm gonna call it P3 people, you know. Um the files, I'm gonna call them P3 people, and then the Leah, I'm gonna call it P3. Okay, so I don't know. I just feel like that's a better thing to do, especially given how social discourse about it is. So anyway, yeah, I had a discussion about P3 with a bunch of people, but one person in particular, and the thing we were discussing revolved around something called MAPS, which is minors attracted persons, which are basically just P3 people. I don't even right now it feels somehow to say they are simply just P3 people because P3 is both a crime and also somewhat of a diagnosis in and of itself. And I'm not sure if I want to go into that distinction. So let me just go into the conversation. The conversation was about, should P3 be seen as a sexual orientation in and of itself? Right? Should pedophilia be seen as a sexual orientation in and of itself? So same thing like homosexuality, heterosexuality, asexuality. And we went through different discussion points and everything, arguments, why it would or can be seen as a sexual orientation and arguments against that, what it would take for me personally to accept it being called a sexual orientation, why it should not simply just be a paraphernalia and also a sexual orientation, and why it should not even be a sexual orientation in the first place. And I recognize that this is a conversation I cannot have in public, particularly on a public platform, right? I can only have these things in secluded private instances, such as the instance I just gave. I can't have this as a conversation on Twitter, for example. I'm going to dead name that app till it dies. I can't have that conversation on Twitter, especially if I'm arguing or I'm saying that this can be reasons why P3 can be seen as a sexual orientation. Many people would simply just group me under P3 people, right? I'll just be a PDF file. Do you understand? So, because of things like that, it's very surprising for me and also somewhat elating, if I'm going to admit it's somewhat elating, that I can have conversations like that with somebody and have it not turn violent and have no misconceptions about my persons or my personhood being, like ascribed towards me. Essentially, what I'm saying is we were able to have that discussion and come out at the end without thinking any of us are P3 people. We were not PDF files, right? We're simply just having a very difficult conversation. And I think back to why we were able to have that conversation in and of itself. And a couple of things stand out to me. One of the things that I think helped the conversation in and of itself was trust. Trust that the reason why we are having this conversation, the reason why this person is having that particular standpoint isn't malice, isn't malicious in and of itself, it's not insidious, right? I started from a place of trust that this person is not arguing that, oh, it should be a sexual orientation because they themselves are and they just want an excuse to fill in the gaps. I had to have that particular trust because they could assume the same thing about me, that I am staunchly against this or something along those lines because I am and I do not want to risk exposure, right? So we could have damaging preconceived notions about each other's personhood and each other's personality and the reason for why we are engaging in that conversation. And I don't think that will help usually. I think for most conversations to have a somewhat productive outcome, the people in those conversations need to trust that the other person having this conversation with them is doing it in good faith. We need to have good faith for each other in these conversations. So even when it is a conversation about, let's say, your sexual partner doesn't satisfy you sexually and you're trying to tell them about it, you need to have good faith that this person cares for you enough and is concerned about you enough to listen to your worries. And they also have to have the good faith in you that you are bringing these things up not to criticize and demean and just attack them in one way, but rather that you are trying to make things better for the both of you, especially yourself. You have to have good faith about somebody in this kind of conversations. And I think that's the problem majority of the time, whether it is a child addressing the neglect of a parent, whether it is a lover addressing their neglects in a relationship, whether it is a teacher talking to a student or a student talking to a teacher about how they felt mistreated and all this kind of stuff, we are unable to have kind of like a baseline level of trust, which I call good faith, in the other person because we aren't sure whether they have that in them. We aren't sure whether this teacher that has been treating us this very, very marginalized way has been doing it out of malice, or whether it's just due to a framework and they don't necessarily hate you. It's just that according to their framework, this is how they are supposed to treat people. Good students do not receive good treatment. You tough love bad students into becoming good students, which doesn't really work ever. I've taught for almost 10 years. Trust me, it doesn't work. You can't tough love not in the way people mean tough love, by the way, this harsh being mean as encouragement. It doesn't work. You are not their father, their mother, okay? Their desire to impress you is not that high. It's not as high as you think it is. Trust me. They don't give a fuck. Anyway, let's say for instance a girl who has been having coitus with this guy and she has been faking her orgasms all this while. She would have trepidations bringing it up and how he's not sexually satisfying her because she cannot have a basic level of trust. She can't have good faith in him that his ego would not override the conversation, that he cares enough about her and her own pleasure to actually want to learn how he's failing in achieving that, which is our pleasure, and how we can better give her that, right? We need to have good faith of the other person or other people in the conversation for the conversation itself to begin. Whether we are operating of the same definition or whether we're operating of the same conceptualization or understanding of a concept, we need to have basic trust in each other. It reminds me of a time where I think two mutuals of mine on Twitter were arguing about P3, and one was arguing about who gets to be called a P3, right? That was essentially the argument. And both of them were operating off very valid frameworks. One was operating of a legal definition of the framework, and one was operating of a psychological clinical definition of the framework. And both of them were very, very valid. But the thing is, it doesn't really intersect, it doesn't really combine well when we just stand on those definitions. And we do not understand how those definitions impact how we have that discussion, right? And so it felt like both of them, they were fighting and everything. And in my head, I kept going through their back and forths. I was like, both of you agree, you just don't realize you do. And that's because you think you have two separate antagonistic definitions of P3, of PDF, but actually you don't. It's just how they are used. In psychology, there's a much more stricter definition for PT than there is in law, right? And so for the law one, it's much more broad, it encompasses a lot. For the clinical definition, it is much more restricted, it's a much more smaller circle, right? And I am the person who were having the conversation about P3 understood that. We laid that on the ground and agreed that both of us were working from a clinical definition, especially when we were going to be talking about it in terms of sexual orientation. We needed, to define things much more strictly, especially in lines with how we define sexual orientation. And so, which brings me to the next thing that I would say helps the conversation a lot, apart from having a trust of goodwill, in each other, that this conversation isn't for malicious purposes or intent. It was also the desire to hear each other out, right? If I have good faith in you that okay, you have some arguments, whether they are good arguments or not is not the problem. You have arguments that you genuinely, honestly hold, and you are willing to defend and talk about, and I have mine. We need to hear each other out. Don't get me wrong, there were lots of times where it was like, let me speak now. You're not letting me speak. You're interrupting me where he was interrupting me. And then at some point, I started doing the same thing back without realizing it. And, we had to constantly have this thing where we tell each other to calm down, and then we'll argue about our behavior, but then always argue in such a way where it's not like, oh, you're a bad person, you're a bad person. No, like this is not helping the conversation. So we'll quickly resolve that problem so that we can get back to the conversation, right? We had goodwill for each other. We had a basic level of trust in each other, despite not knowing each other at all. And then we were willing to hear each other out. Whenever it felt like someone was misunderstanding the other person, we would call it and be like, okay, I think you're misunderstanding me in this particular area. Let me explain what I mean, what I think the thing you are misunderstanding is, and then I want to hear what you have to say about that. And then sometimes it will turn out, oh, this is not that this person is misunderstanding you, it's just that they are looking at it from another perspective that you haven't considered, right? And that happened a lot of times. And we wouldn't be able to realize all of that if, number one, we didn't have goodwill for each other. Again, a basic level of trust in each other that this is a conversation with genuine hopes and outcomes, right? We are simply just trying to figure things out. Because I remember somebody saying once that human rights are not up for debate, except they are. That is how we arrived at human rights. We debated at what rights a human being is supposed to have. And we've constantly had those debates. While some things are now cemented down, we are still having those debates. Till today, we are still having debates about whether homosexuality should be a thing. We are still having debates about abortion and whether it can be seen as healthcare, etc., etc., etc. These are all difficult conversations, and right. And all the time, sometimes it is definitely, oh, I'm arguing this way because I just want to be able to hate on people. But many times, I find that these conversations and arguments are honestly just people trying to figure shit out, people trying to just figure things out. And sometimes the conversations get heated because these are personal issues, which brings me to the third thing. These are personal issues. Even though the both of us are not P3 people, right? It still kind of relates to us personally because this will affect people in our community. This will affect people we care about externally and globally speaking. There's a level to it being personal, especially when we know that having these discussions can allow people to label us with certain labels that we do not ascribe to and should not be used to describe us. So we need to be very, very careful about that, right? We need to be very, very careful about how we are representing ourselves in those conversations. But the thing is, we need to recognize it is personal. This idea that, oh, it's not personal. No, it is personal, but then depersonalize yourself. And I always repeated that during the entire thing. I was like, I kept telling my conversation partner, my opponent, quote unquote, that he needs to depersonalize himself sometimes. And the way I define it, which I don't think is the way many people define it, but the way I define it is, despite you being involved in this situation, recognize what you are discussing about. We are not discussing necessarily you. Do you understand? We are discussing an event, we are discussing a concept, we are discussing something that affects you, that affects us, but we are not discussing you. So when I say that's a terrible argument, it is not a evaluation or judgment of who you are. It's simply just a valuation or judgment of how you see things or how you presented something. So like when I say so are you this and that and that and that, I'm not talking about him in particular. I'm talking about the argument, right? So like one thing we kept on doing throughout the time where we were discussing PDF files and PDF, it's is that we kept on doing this thing where we would provide explanations for ourselves. Like, oh, I'm not saying this because I am, oh, I'm not saying this because I want, right? We need to reassure each other to maintain that trust that we started with, you understand? Because along the lines, we will say fucked up things. You will say things out of anger. You will say things you did not think through, etc., etc., etc. You will just say fucked up things. And so during that time, all the participants in the difficult conversation need to reassure themselves and the others that they are good actors. They are still good actors. I'm not arguing for this because I want PDF to be rampant and everything. I'm not arguing for this. I'm not saying this. I'm not doing this to be mean to you. I'm not doing this to hate on you. I'm not doing this to overly criticize you. I just think, we need to discuss this. And maybe the way I'm discussing it is not optimal. Let me know whether I need to like bring down my voice, different things like that. We needed to constantly reassure each other, right? But on some level, part of that reassurance was also trying to not seem like a guilty party, was also trying to stave off some sort of personal shame of being involved in the argument. And that's the thing. If you think a conversation needs to be had, no matter how difficult, controversial, nasty, disgusting the conversation topic is, do not feel ashamed that you are participating in it. If it is necessary, then it is necessary. If it needs to be hard, then it needs to be hard. There is no place for shame there. And so one thing I have learned is to remove myself from my arguments in that particular manner. I do not feel ashamed for having these arguments. I might be wrong. I might be misreading something. I might be, not based in facts, etc., etc., etc. I might be too emotional about it. You understand? But I'm not gonna have shame about this thing, because when I have shame about this thing, then I feel defensive, I feel argumentative, I feel like I'm being personally attacked whenever something I said is rejected, even though I feel strongly about it. Just because I feel strongly about something in a conversation doesn't mean the other person should. And I think that's one thing that always perturbs me in like conversations with people where we're arguing for something, is that the other person feels so very strongly about this other thing and they want to pass that across, but we always mistake the fact that because we feel that way, the other person also needs to feel that way. No. How you feel about something, your emotions and intensity of emotions around it is yours, is for you, not the other person. You need to bring the other person to an understanding of what you mean, how you see things and everything, but they do not need to react to the reality the exact same way you are. That is not the point of any of that. So that's the personalization. So 4 things now. You need to have a basic level of trust, like some sort of goodwill for and in each other. You need to be able to hear each other out. So you need to desire to hear the other person out and also desire yourself to be heard. Communication is a two-way street. You need to depersonalize. In other words, remove shame and learn that it's not really about you. Sometimes it is, don't get me wrong, sometimes it is, but it's not really about you. So a rejection of ideas is not necessarily a rejection of you, unless you think those ideas are so closely and neatly tied to your sense of identity that it's one and the same. And the fifth thing is the desire for a resolution. You cannot One thing about these discussions is there needs to be a point. It cannot just be a bullshit conversation. It cannot be a bullshit argument, right? Why are you raising these things? Are you simply just raising them because if you don't like them, but like you don't really know why you don't like them, and you are trying to communicate that you don't like them and you don't know why you don't like them and you don't have any idea whether you want them to change about it. So like it's too much confusion that needs to be figured out. It's fine if you don't know why you don't like something, but why are you raising this thing up? Are you raising it for awareness sake? Then you need to drive the conversation in that manner. And what should that awareness do? What do you want from that awareness? Do you understand? Now that they are aware of the fact that you don't like you're being flicked in a particular type of way, what do you want from that outcome? One would say not flicking my being in this particular way. Then the furthermore there will not be, if you have a certain way that you want your being flicked, tell. Do you get? For us, it was we want to determine what counts as a sexual orientation, whether PDF files can be put under that categorization, and why that categorization might be helpful in the conversation, right? Not necessarily, oh, since they are born that way. Because I've been with somebody who thought that way, that, me playing devil's advocate at the time for why PDF can be a sexual orientation means, oh, I want to justify. No, I'm not. No, and that's what I was saying. Goodwills, and sometimes for that goodwill to be cemented, you need to state what you think very clearly. You need to state why you're having that particular discussion and what the outcome is, and why you think okay. Because the answer is okay, fine. Let's say PDF is a sexual orientation. What then? What then? Should we just allow these things happen, etc., etc., etc.? You need to be able to tell them that, oh, just because I'm arguing for this doesn't mean this is what I want, this is the outcome. I just want to have a better understanding of this particular thing. And that alone is fine, just wanting to have a better understanding of something. It doesn't have to, be about total global world impact. Sometimes just having a better understanding about something is good enough reason to have a difficult conversation. Do you understand? So 5 things: trust, a basic level of trust and goodwill in each other, willingness to hear each other out, depersonalize, in other words, remove shame, and constantly realize that your ideas are not everything that you are. And just because an idea is being rejected doesn't mean you necessarily are being rejected, although there are exceptions, a lot of exceptions. Number 4, reassure each other. Do you understand? Trust is built on reassurance. Let your words and your actions and the way you are passing your points across, the way you're having discussion, the way you are communicating with this person, let them offer reassurance for the goodwill that was generated at the beginning. But it's not blind assurance, though. It's not blind assurance. Once you notice that, this person is a snake, a green snake in the green grass, okay? This person is a wolf in sheep's clothing. This person is masquerading empathy and concern, but actually they are dismissing you at every single point. Clock it. Clock it immediately. Do not wait for the green sign. Do not wait for escape jail or go from jail or whatever that go card is. Just pull out your Uno reverse immediately, okay? Uno abandon. Conversation like that, I just leave. Uno abandon. And the 5th thing is expectations. Expectations. What are your expectations for that conversation? What do you hope to come out of that conversation with? What do you hope the conversation will do? What do you hope that, just engaging in it at the bare minimum would do, right? You need to have this expectation so you're not just floundering about. So yeah, that's what I learned from that experience. Or should I say that's what I realized from that experience. So let me know what you think. You can reach out to me email Daniel at Adisa Briggs, send me a goddamn DM, Twitter at Daniel Briggs, send me a goddamn DM. Let me know what you think. Or if you're on YouTube Music, you can simply just go into the comment section and tell me what you think. Don't worry, I will check it out, read it, and make sure I reply to every single comment. Why? Because you are just that precious. Don't forget to subscribe if you are not. Don't forget to share if you haven't. And I'll see you in the next one.